Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this second webinar, LISTalks on energy transition. This time the topic is strengthening the security and resilience of future power grids. So just before a few words on the LISTalks conference series, this aims at bringing together stakeholders, researchers, industry, authorities, and to answer the state-of-the-art research and innovation questions on our environment, climate change, and sustainability in strategies and design. So, as I told you, this is the second webinar, preceding one live event, the Energy Transition Day, that will happen in Luxembourg on the 30th of June, 2022. And the main topic is on resilience, which is a relatively recent concept, especially the power grids area when compared to the traditional concept of security or operational reliability. And recently there has been some confusion in the community regarding the overlaps and differences between these two concepts. So this webinar is meant to lift this fog. And for this, it presents two views on these concepts, one from the industrial perspective in the first talk, and the second one from a research angle. The talks will discuss the commonalities and differences between these two concepts, security and resilience, how we can strengthen them in future power grids, especially at the transmission area. So I would like to inform you as well that this session will be recorded, and this will have two presentations. I will introduce the first speaker. He will do his presentation, and then the second speaker, and questions will be asked only at the end. However, you are able to put your questions in the questions box even during the presentation. So I encourage you to, whenever you have a question, please write it already in the question box, and a selection of these will be answered at the end of both presentations. So with this, without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker for today that comes with the industry perspective on security and resilience of the power grid from a TSO perspective. And it's Rui Pestana, received the title of expert in energy by the Polytechnic Institute of Lisbon with a master degree of electrical power engineering from the University of Lisbon. He is a project leader on the research center R&D Nestor. He is also advisor to the system operator division with REN, Redes Energéticas Nacionais, the main Portuguese TSO. He is also an invited professor at ISEL, Instituto Superior de Engenharia de Lisboa, from the Polytechnic Institute of Lisbon. And he has been working for several years in different working groups of SIGRE, NSOE, and also in European funded projects, FP6, FP7, and H2020. He was also the recipient of the SIGRE Technical Committee Award. So, Rui, it's a pleasure to have you here. Please feel free to begin.
Okay. Thank you, Andre, and I want to thanks for the invitation. But it's a pleasure to give the TSO perspective, and I think the topic about security and resilience is very updated, and it's good to share that experience. Okay, I will pass the slides, but anyway, I will remove my camera meanwhile. Okay, so the topics that I will cover is, of course, to explain what is the view of the TSO in its position. It looks to the system, okay, and then of course we are tackling the security, and basically I will focus on security rules from NSOE, which is the European Network for Transmission System Operators for Electricity, and then I will focus on the resilience part, and I will look to the lack of resilience. As you can see, I'm going to focus a little bit on major incidents that they were passed in the last decades. And then I will try to wrap up and then pass the word to Florian. Okay, so giving the TSO perspective, I mean, you have here the what is called the virtual chain. So production, transmission, distribution, and consumer. Okay, at the old time, this was a vertical integrated company. Okay, sometimes it's normal in other countries. In Europe, it was already forced to split. As you can see, production is basically big power plants. All of them were synchronous machines. The transmission, of course, the role was to aggregate all the production at a very high voltage. We were like the single buyer for the public sector. and here it's normally where we have the transmission system operator, or in the United States, the ISO, the independent system operator. The distribution, of course, takes this power from the transmission, and the focus, as you can see here, is the consumer, and it has some small embedded generation at medium voltage, high voltage on the grid, and the consumer, as you can see, it must be certified at any cost. And at the long time ago, I mean, if you go back for a few decades, there were no self generation. So the TSO is focused on the generation, and the DSO is focused on the consumer. Okay, so there is no overlapping, as you can see, and this works very well. The question is that when you look to now and the future, okay, what you see is that the production, the big power plants are retiring, especially in Europe related to coal. We have less synchronous machines, okay. Transmission is not aggregating all the production because it's everywhere nowadays on the distribution at even consumer level. And we are not anymore the single buyer, so the market pool is selecting the energy mix, okay. The distribution, what you see is the embedded generation is getting larger and larger with wind and solar. Okay, the consumer nowadays, at least we expect the flexibility to price. Okay, so with the demand side management, and of course they have with self-generation. So what is the change on the focus? I mean, the focus still remains. The TSO now is focused in all generation everywhere, meaning that on the transmission, on the distribution, on the consumer level. Of course, we have more variable forecasted generation like wind and solar. And for transmission perspective, we see a load pattern that is changing, which is the net load. Okay, because part of the generation is already produced by the distribution. The DSO also is maintaining the focus on the consumer, but of course the load pattern is changing by PV and electrical vehicles. Okay, and of course this is causing congestion issues on the distribution side. Okay, so this is what I wanted to explain about the perspective. Going to the security rules. Okay. Security rules, you have to understand that they are not new. Okay, the system is secure for a long time, and we have what we call operational handbooks. So as I can say, it's the basic for a secure and resilient system. Okay, and this was already developed a long time ago when there was the UCPTE. So it was a united coordination of production plus transmission. As you can see, we had to lose the P because we have to, because of the unbundling, and then the P went away, the production, and we kept the other letters with UCTE, which is a coordination of the transmission. Okay, but then because of the European laws, and we changed to ENSUI, so it's the new name that is coming up. So and since then, since UCT times, we have the policies was 128. Now they are reorganized in the ENSOE framework, and we have what we call framework agreement, which is the synchronous errors framework agreement, the SAFA. Okay, mainly now they are focused on 6 agreements, and we have this kind of links that we will share the presentation later. And then you can seek this in the ENSOE website. Anyway, as you know, the grid codes nowadays are mandatory by European level, by the European Commission. This started a long time ago, but they are already in place. They were split in 3 sections: one related to connection, the other for operations, the other one related to markets. And for connection, the one most related, of course, is the requirement for generators, for new generators, and of course the demand connection code looking to the consumers. And then there is more technical points related to HVDC, the high voltage direct current. Regarding operations, we have, of course, emergency restoration, cybersecurity, and daily operations, the day ahead and the week ahead, and everything. Market, as you can see nowadays, everything is market related. We have here the forecast allocation, capacity allocation for interchange capacity, and issues related to congestion management and electricity balancing as a lot of products. You can find this in ENTSO-E, okay, and they created an app that you can download in your mobile phone, and also the regulators, the Florence School of Regulation, they publish this edition, and I think there is another one already updated for 2020, I think. Anyway, regarding requirements for generators, this is split in different types of generators. So A is the ones that are more related to distribution at a lower level, and then the requirements increase based on size and, of course, the voltage level. Okay, at transmission level, there will be always type D, and they must align with the synchronous machines. Okay, anyway, the requirements that we are asking for the generator is frequency, general system management, the robustness of the generating units, system restoration, and voltage stability. Okay, this is too much technical. I will not go in any details, but you have the links here to pursue that. Okay. Regarding system adequacy, which is one of the roles that ENTSO-E has to do, as I mentioned, the TSO is not responsible. I mean, it's forbidden to have generation assets, but we are almost responsible to make sure that there is generation assets on the system. Okay, it looks like a contradiction, but of course we try to help anything that is needed. Okay. So, and these requirements are at each synchronous areas. Okay, Europe nowadays is structured in 5 synchronous areas. Of course, Ireland, United Kingdom, the Nordel, the Nordic system, which is Norway, Sweden, Finland, and part of the Danish. The Baltic system, which in the future will be connected also to the synchronous machine, to the synchronous continental Europe, the former UCTE, and which is already connected from Turkey to Tunisia through AC cables in Gibraltar. Anyway, as you can see, this map is updated related to this month, and nowadays we have Ukraine and Moldavia synchronous with Europe, with continental Europe. Okay. Regarding this, what I want to mention is about the system adequacy. You have 2 types of keywords that you have to mention. Normally, the system adequacy looks to energy, okay? But of course, we have to deal with the capacity, which is basically the instantaneous power, okay? So transmission and grids have to manage instantaneous power. I mean, we have to make sure that the power can come from the generator to the consumer in real time. So capacity is our main problem. Okay, that's why we may have congestion issues. But when we try to use system adequacy to see if we have the energy sources for the entire year, it's more on the megawatt hour. Okay, over all the hours of the year. And as you know, if you want to go to 100% renewable, where we rely only on wind or only on solar, if the wind and solar have average capacities or average use of 30%, means that for this to keep the 100, you need to have 3 times more capacity on wind to manage the energy needs. On solar, you need to have 5 times more. Okay, so this will cause a lot of issues on the transmission grid and needs a lot of investments on the transmission grids. Going back to the system adequacy, you can find out these maps that on the reports that ENTSO-E provides for 2025 and for 2030. As you can see, there are some countries where there is no loss of load expectation, so it means that each country has its own resources. But there are some countries that they have some minor issues. Okay, this assumes, of course, that they are using only the internal capacity, but we can mitigate this with interchange capacity. That's why all the systems are interconnected to make sure that in the end of the day there is no loss of load expectation. Okay, regarding the resilience, let me see my time. Normally, we think that the system is very reliable. Of course, we never hear a lot about blackouts, but anyway, I want to mention that there was already 3 since the year 2000. Okay, one in Italy 2003, one in Greece in 2004. Turkey has some more recent issues in 2015, and recently we have been facing with system splits. Okay, I will focus each one of these, and of course, nowadays other type of phenomena which is not a blackout and not a system split is system oscillations that may cause some issues on the grid. Okay, so going back to 2003 in Italy, I mean, of course, this was well known. There was some issues on the interconnection between Switzerland and Italy. This line tripped, the other ones overloaded, and they get isolated, and then the frequency went down, and they start they try to be reconnected and to get stable, but after 2.5 minutes the system collapsed. Okay, what I want I will not comment the whys and what we could be done, but what I want to show here is that one of the things that went against the collapse and in favor of the collapse was the loss of the embed generation on the distribution grid. Okay, this is, as I mentioned, our focus, our concern as a TSO and as a system operator is to rely on the generation to keep the lights up. So in this case, this phenomena was accelerated because of the loss of the 1,700 megawatts of distributed generation. The other one in 2004, this was a voltage collapse, was not a frequency issue, and this was in July 2004, just before the Olympics in August in Greece. It's a slow phenomena, but they were unable to keep the voltage on the system, and then the system collapsed. Going back to Turkey, this incident was that there were some maintenance lines here. As you can see, these 2 lines, and that one was out of service because of maintenance work. There was a lot of generation on this part of Turkey, and of course, Istanbul and the major load was in the western part. There was not enough capacity to move the energy. There was a fault in one line, and the system collapsed. Okay. Once again, it was a frequency issue that at the end the entire system collapsed. Going to the system split, maybe people don't recall this. This was in between Christmas and then the end of the year in 1999, just before the year 2000. There was winds bigger than 200 kilometers per hour in France, and a lot of overhead lines tripped because of they dropped because of the wind. And you can see the 4 connections here on the south in France was disrupted, and Iberia was isolated. At that time, of course, we didn't have a lot of wind in the system, and the system was able to recover very well. The other one that we may recall is the 2006 related to Germany. Okay, the system started splitting Germany, and they went back until Croatia, and then split in 3. The problem was that when it was together, everything was balanced, but when it was split, you had higher frequency on the green area and lower frequency on the orange part. The bad thing is that the frequency went to 49 hertz. We had to cut load to balance the system, and once again we had the loss of generation in an area that is with lack of with the frequency is low. Okay, so this will accelerate and it will increase the fall of the frequency, and so this is bad, meaning that the generation is not providing is not working correctly. It means if this happens, the system is not resilient. Okay, so this was one of the major causes of the fact that the frequency went down. In 2021, going back to the next year, to the last year, there was two major incidents. As you can see, we had these phenomena are very rare, but they can happen anytime. And this was once again an issue in Croatia, and it split the system. And we had an area with lower frequency, the other one with higher frequency. But nothing happens very critical, because the frequency didn't go very high and didn't come very low. So there was no disconnection of loads on this. Okay. In contrary, in the 24th of July 2021, we had an issues in the south of France during because of fires, and there were tripping of the lines and everything. The system got split. The frequency here went down a lot. Okay, as you can see, went below the 49, reaching 48.67 hertz in 4.6 seconds. Okay, for you to have an idea how fast this kind of phenomena works. Once again, we had the loss of embed generation. This time was not so much, but of course we had to balance the lack of generation by cutting load. Okay, and here I will mean that this was a really bit worried, not because I was here in Lisbon, because this for me it was a near miss. So if the frequency reaches 48 hertz during 3 seconds more, the generation in Spain would stop working, and of course we could have faced with Iberian blackout. Okay, unfortunately, luckily it didn't happen. Regarding system oscillations, okay, typically you see this interconnected system, the different synchronous areas, and of course systems they tend to oscillate. Okay, synchronous masses they oscillate. Normally, what we have here on the top is the north-south oscillation, and this was caused by Italy. Okay, Italy was provoking the system between Italy and the Danish, and the frequency oscillated a lot during more than 15 minutes. So this was really a major issue. They were able to stop the oscillation, and nothing happens. Here is a situation, other situation, which is the east-west oscillation in 1st of December 2016. There was a line that opened in France, and the system starting to oscillate between Iberia and Turkey. Okay, and we had this kind of phenomena that lasted a few minutes. Okay, so this is something new, meaning that the system is prone to this kind of events. Okay, just to try to wrap up regarding future challenging, as you can see, frequency stability is a major concern. So we have less inertia to the reduction of synchronous machines, and of course we have higher rate of change of frequency, so the rock-off. Okay. And we know that if the system split, like it happened in Iberia, we may have higher rock-off than the rest of the Europe. And there is always a concern if the rock-off is bigger than 1 hertz per second. Okay, and once again, we have the undesired disconnection of distribution energy resources during frequency excursion. This is the most biggest concern as we have. Regarding voltage control, what I could say is that we have less synchronous machines that can provide this kind of voltage control, and of course not all type of generators, because you have a lot of PV or other types of generation in lower voltage. They are not obliged to provide voltage control. Congestion. The issue about congestion is that we need to manage, and there is a lack of observability and capability of controlling the distributed energy resources at distribution grid. Okay, this is really, of course, we are working a lot on this, more on the distribution grid than on the transmission. To conclude, I just have two last slides just to wrap up, and I'm repeating some of the things. So frequency stability, system split may create rock-off higher than 1 Hz. Okay, there is a concern that the generators are not able to follow the frequency if they go higher than this, and then we lose the generators. As also mentioned, we have the undesired disconnection of generation during frequency excursion. For lower frequency or higher frequency, the higher frequency is not the big deal, but the under frequency it is. The good news is that we have fast power electronics, so we have inverters, HVDC, that can provide the frequency containing reserves. And the other good news that we have that we see on the horizon is that the battery energy storage system, they also can provide fast frequency control. Regarding congestion, as I mentioned, the main concern is the lack of observability, what's happening on the distribution grid, and the control. I mean, the capability to disconnect or to curtail the injection on the distribution grid. Of course, we are expecting consumer flexibility based on price or other incentives. I know that there is a lot of discussions on this. And of course, we need to have grid expansion on the transmission and on the distribution if we want to increase, of course, the generation capacity to deal with wind and solar. Okay, especially after the recent crisis, that we need to reduce the need of gas, and we need to have more wind and solar require more grid. Okay, so that's finally, we also have grid flexibility. Nowadays, every TSO is working on the dynamic line ratings, which allows to explore the additional capacity that we have on the grid due to higher winds, less solar exposure, or lower temperature and everything. Anyway, the interchange capacity nowadays are assessed by the regional security coordination, as you can see, and this allows to maximize the interchange capacity all over Europe. Regarding market design, as you know, marginal markets are more unstable, and we see that with the gas problems, with the price of gas and the price of CO2. The prices are really sky high, but sometimes they have negative prices because of the excess of wind in some hours of the day. And the bad news is that people don't like to pay to produce, and during the negative prices, they are switching off the generation. Okay, so if everyone does this, we're going to have a blackout. So the question is that we need to keep some economical incentive besides the marginal price. So I'm in favor, of course, of capacity markets that are more stable, and at least we don't have this kind of fuzzy behavior of the generation. If the prices are negative, they are going out. And of course, there is more international system, I mean, at international level for European products, like the XPID, the Picasso, Marie, and Terre, that they are dealing with primary, secondary, and tertiary reserves in all Europe. And to finalize, as you know, we are waiting for, I mean, we are appealing for the aggregation of consumers and agents, okay, to create volume for the TSO products. Because as I mentioned, I mean, we are not dealing with a few megawatts, we are dealing with hundreds and sometimes thousands of megawatts that we deal with the market. Okay, thank you. And with this, I finish, and I hope I was able to keep the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rui, and thanks for keeping the time. It was great. So now it's time to go to our second speaker of the day, so Florin. But before I introduce Florin, just to remind people, you can ask the questions during the presentations in the question box, and we will answer them in the end. So to introduce my colleague at LIST, Florin Capitanescu received the electrical power engineering degree from Polytechnical University of Bucharest in Romania in 1997, and the PhD degree from the University of Liège in Belgium in 2003. Since 2015, he has been with the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology as a senior researcher, and his main research interests include the application of optimization methods to operation of transmission and active distribution systems, particularly in what regards optimal power flow, power system security, voltage instability, and also smart sustainable building. So with that, Florin, I pass you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Can you see my screen actually, because I do not?
Yes, we can.
Okay, then I will switch off my camera. It will be easier. Okay. So welcome to this presentation. As the title announces, it is on strengthening the security and resilience of future power grids. Well, my main motivation here is that I think everyone tends to agree that power grids have to become more resilient in the future. However, my feeling is that different people have very distinct definition and interpretation of what resilience means. And by that, I mean that we have, to some extent, too many concepts into power system, and that there could be some overlap with, especially with the concept of reliability, and to a less extent to the one of security, which means actually reliability in operation. By the way, I think that this relation between resilience and reliability is even more confusing than the one between resilience and security. And I see that the old school tries to put resilience as a component of reliability, whereas the new school and researcher working in resilience try to sell it as a complement to reliability. But this would be for another talk. Let's keep it now for resilience and security. In this presentation, I will do basically three things. So first, I will revisit the concept of power system security. Then I would introduce and analyze the concept of power system resilience. And I will end up with discussing the overlaps and differences between them. As you know, power system infrastructure, a vast part of it is outside, okay? And hence it is vulnerable to threats and to extreme events like storm or icing, floods, wildfire, and so on. It is, of course, by default vulnerable to short circuit and more recently to cyber attacks. For this, I'd like to take a modeling perspective and to introduce the notion of contingency. I forgot to mention that given the audience is very diverse in background, I would keep this presentation on high level and also in a more in lay terms. Okay, so I will not use the, let's say, very efficient terminology from power system. So contingency basically it's an unexpected disconnection of one or multiple system elements. Okay, could be generator like in this one, which is a layout of a simple grid or a line. And what is very important for security is the concept of n-1 contingencies, okay, which means the disconnection of a single grid element at the time, okay. Then when these contingencies happen and in different operating conditions, they may lead to blackout. Blackouts may have very harmful societal impact, especially when long lasting. We already introduced some of the issues, and especially the Italian blackout in 2003, this one. There is also in the same year very interesting blackout also unfortunately happened in US. would like just to mention that, in my opinion, the root cause of both blackouts is a poorly managed line disconnection. So it was not something in which the nature was so extreme. So basically, both networks were what we call n-1 insecure. So I will explain later what I mean by this. Now, basically, this Tybo figure wants to show you the following things: the relation between threats, okay, that, as I can say, could be n-1 faults, disconnection, but also n-2, n-3, meaning we can lose 2 or 3 elements of the network at the same time due to different hazards like wildfire, floods, and so on. And this could materialize into events, okay? Then these events may have different impacts. Generally, they could be measured with different metrics. So very often we look at interrupted power and interruption time, okay? Now, power systems are also armed with defenses against all of these contingencies or events. Like, for instance, preventive actions. Actions that we can take before an event happens, so anticipating an event. After one event happened, one can take corrective actions or emergency action. And finally, when the system reaches a harmful state, one could take restorative actions to restore normal operation. Okay. Then these control actions generally are computed or calculated thanks to decision-making tools in control center by these guys behind the screen, by the transmission system operator, whose goal is, of course, to minimize the impact on the power grid of all these harmful events. Let's move now to security or operation reliability. So, by definition, security is the power system ability to withstand contingencies. What I mean by withstand, so I mean that the system has to have a stable transition after a contingency toward the viable operating point without experiencing loss of load or generation. And I have here a nice plot with a voltage evolution in time. And as you can see, there are these two which are clearly stable behaviors of the system post-contingency, whereas these three are unstable. Of course, these are labeled secure and unsecure in turn. Now, the main requirement in power system is, of course, as a critical infrastructure, they have to operate with very high reliability. And this reliability is generally measured through different metrics on yearly basis. There in general, it's the number of like the frequency of interruptions, duration of interruptions, and this kind of stuff that everybody knows, so energy non-served. Okay. However, in transmission grid, to do so, the system has to comply in operation with a heuristic criteria, which is the so-called n-1 that I'm going to define on the next slide. So this n-1 security criterion means that at any time, the system must be able to withstand the loss of any single equipment, okay? Like, for instance, this generator over here or this line, but not both at the same time. The system is not dimensioned naturally to do so, but it can in some cases. I think that it's extremely useful to relate security with system operation states, okay, that were introduced already long time ago by Tom Diliaco and then improved by many other authors. As you may know, there are basically 5 operating states in power systems. So this normal operating state, in which any contingency postulated does not lead to any violation. Then after some external disturbance, the system could enter an alert state. In an alert state, still no constraint is violated, but if a contingency occurs, then there might be violations, okay? Of course, if any harmful contingency occurs, then the system will already have some violations, and so enters the emergency state. From that one, the system could move in some cases into a state called in extremis, in which the transition between the two is, let's say, determined only by the protections of the system. And in this one, I mean, there is only the protection of the system. It's the last layer of defense who could save the system, okay? From that one, this could be a blackout, for instance. One have to restore, to take some actions to restore the system to alert state and through this to normal state, or directly to the normal state, okay? Now, in terms of control action, it goes like follow. The actions that you have seen in the previous slide. So Once we get into alert state, we could have the preventive control that would drive the system back into normal state. From emergency state, we have the corrective control that would bring back the system into alert state. Emergency control, these are only very fast actions that have just one way to go, from emergency to in extremis, whereas from restoration state, we can, through restorative control, to move to normal state and alert state. Now, the modeling framework for this N-1 security actually comprises only these three states, which are normal, alert, and emergency. It doesn't care for these two others. Well, regarding the means to strengthen security, so basically these means are initiated and determined by the operators and are basically the preventive and corrective actions, okay? Which are the classical one, topology switching, controllable transformer, and especially generation power redispatch. Whereas in the future, in future grids, I think it would be more and more reliance on storage, shiftable loads, shifting load, and also coordination with distribution system operators to exploit flexibility present in distribution system. Of course, all these controls need also to take into account that power systems have already some automatic response after contingency in terms of frequency or voltages, okay? Now, in general, how these actions are computed. So one of the most useful tools present is the so-called security constraint OPF or SCOPF, which basically compute the base trade-off cost optimal between preventive and corrective control actions to satisfy static security constraints for each foreseen operating state of the next day. Okay, so this is basically used in day ahead of operation or from day ahead to real time, and it mainly addresses static security constraints or overload and voltages. Now, once we want to integrate more and more renewables into the system, we face, in my opinion, three main challenges, so of progressive degree of complexity. So the first one is how to maintain the balance between production and consumption. And this curve here, it's a famous DAC curve, which shows the net load. I mean by this, that the difference between load and renewable generation. And it can show that in system with high penetration of solar, like the California one in US, one may need to have very sharp ramp, like in an 13 gigawatt of power in 3 hours, which is extremely difficult to do, because this could come from conventional generators or from storage. Once we are able to satisfy the power balance, challenge number two is how to satisfy static operating constraint, meaning by this loading of circuits and voltage magnitude. And Rui have shown that there are some famous blackouts initiated by, let's say, the non-satisfaction of those constraints, like the one in Italy, in Turkey especially. The one in Turkey for me is amazing. Everything happened in less than 10 seconds. Okay, then once you are able to satisfy those, in addition, you need to satisfy stability. And you know that there are generally three main forms of instability of a system related to angle, frequency, and voltage. And some sort of instabilities were the basis of this well-known system split in Europe, like the one in November 2006 and the recent one in 2021. Now, there are a lot of challenges ahead to strengthen security. And for me, now we move from the, let's say, the paradigm in which the system were operated as a trade-off between economy and reliability. Now we have to take into account sustainability, renewable generation. We need to move towards 100% renewable. To do so, I identify here three new dimensions that needs to be taken properly into account in all this computation. To first is uncertainties, especially in renewables production, but not only. Second, it's new decision variables that would model the interaction between transmission and distribution system operators that would agree on some exchange of flexibility at their interface. And last one is the temporal links, because we move from, let's say, power control action based in terms of power to control actions in terms of energy. So all of this leads to very challenging and very large scale optimization problems. Okay. By the way, this is a core expertise that we have here in LIST. I take advantage of this for some self-advertising, and we are working to address all of these three dimensions of complexity in the European project ATEST. Okay. Let's move to resilience. So definitions and some observation at my end. So if you go into a dictionary and you look what is the right definition of the word resilience, and then you try to translate it to power grids, it would mean something like the ability of the power grid to quickly adjust to contingency and recover normal operation after them. However, in my opinion, this is it's a misunderstanding. It's a poor understanding of the definition. So basically, resilience is a sort of elasticity, which it's right to some extent, but also false to the other. By design, the power grid, it's already, I would say, resilient with respect to n-1 events, as I said. It's even resilient with respect to a good part of n-2 or more dangerous contingencies, even if it was not planned on purpose to such resilience. So then, in my opinion, the right definition would be that resilience is the ability to withstand and recover after extreme damaging contingencies, I mean, natural disasters, okay? So these are the key words: extreme contingency, which are related to resilience. And then, of course, this concept would apply only to n-k events, I mean, low probability with possible high impact. So in my opinion, the resilience complements security, okay? Now, so basically, this is a very simple graph to show you how they relate security and resilience. So as regard event probability and event impact, so you can see that extraordinary events or those addressing resilience have low probability and very high impact, whereas those ordinary events or n-1 addressing n-1 security have low, medium or high impact, but high probability. Very simple graph to fix a bit the concept in resilience. So basically there are three phases: before event, during event, and after event, okay, with associated control actions. If we assume the three-line contingencies that occur at different times, and we take as performance metric the number of supplied consumers, so after the first contingency, everything goes fine, you can take preventive actions, everything should work fine because you are still covered by n-1 security until actually you are covered by the n-1 security until the moment where the second line disconnects. But you can even, by some luck, still continue not losing load, so still supplying all customers even after the second. However, after the third, things get wrong, and then there could be some emergency actions, so that shed loads, and the number of supplied customers decreases. From that point on, there are some restorative actions that would recover the system to the normal operation, depending on, of course, on the damage on the infrastructure. So what we can conclude from this is that these two phases, phase 1 and 2, are common to security and resilience. However, of course, it's not a matter of this talk, but all phases are common to both reliability and resilience. And the core, let's say the core focus of resilience, in my opinion, is this part: recovering from after events, dangerous events. Let's see how it relates with system operating state. So this is just to remind you that for n-1 security, we had only the framework included only these three states, whereas for n-k resilience, it also models properly, or to the best possible extent, restorative and in extremis state. What are the means to strengthen resilience? So again, operator-initiated preventive and corrective action, although here there could be of different type of actions than for security, like for instance, intentional islanding and so on. Also, operator-initiated restorative actions. For instance, there will be more and more mobile devices, diesel generator storage. We need to pay attention to black start grid capability more and more. We need to make efforts to allow islanded operation of microgrids in such situations. There are nevertheless some issues on modeling and simulating this resilience. First, it's very difficult, in my opinion, to properly model the operator-initiated restorative actions and actually all the sequence of actions to the system restoration. Second, the modeling of power system protection, this is important to take into account, and this is not very easy into all this simulation for resilience. And why? Because mostly scenarios modeling resilience are generally extreme ones in which power grid model may not be valid anymore. The sequence of events like cascading disconnection, restoration process gets increasingly uncertain, and also then the outcome of events and metrics may have high variability. So it's quite difficult to model, simulate, and interpret the results. So this is what summarizes actually the talk of today. According to some criteria, I try to summarize the commonalities and differences between security and resilience. So regarding the events handled, as I said, security deals with n-1, resilience n-k via so-called fragility curves. Probability, it's in general credible, high security, and low, very low or little credible for resilience. Impacts of events could be whatever in security, and very in general very high in resilience. Objective in security, minimizing energy non-supplies, it's a requirement. So basically the goal is to minimize operation cost. In resilience, you need to minimize, for instance, energy non-supply. In terms of control action, they differ through the fact that in resilience you have also this restorative. Calculation tools in security is basically security constraint OPF. In resilience, you have more complex method, not necessarily more complex, but methodology including different modules like cascading simulator, restorative action, and so forth. And main commonalities are, in my opinion, preventive and corrective control. So this is the last slide. I believe that an increasing number of natural disasters arrived and call for increased resilience, but still this is very hard to justify network investments to reinforce the grid to cope with highly unlikely events. However, I strongly believe that resilience considerations have to be integrated somehow in grid power planning tools and operation. How? This is matter of research. And I think also that it's time to have more careful trade-off of grid hardening and grid smartening measures. I mean, by hardening, I mean reinforcement, and by smartening, playing with flexibility and mobile devices. Paying also attention that some measures can improve both resilience and reliability. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Florin, and also for keeping the time. So excellent. Now I would pass this opportunity to ask the questions from the audience. Rui, maybe you can turn on your camera if you will, and we can go through some of the questions we received. So first one for Rui. So thank you for your presentation. You are quantifying the system resilience by showing system frequency and loss of load. Is it the same how you quantify the system security? What is the difference between of showing security or resilience?
Okay, thanks for the question. I think Florian made a good presentation clarifying the two topics, but for me the security is the rules and the criteria to keep the system safe, okay, and resilient is the real capability of the system to cope with severe events, okay. That's why I was showing the resilience, what is happening, because we can have good security rules, okay, but then we have very severe events that can throw away the system for granted, okay, done.
Thank you, Rui. And now one other question. I think it's pretty interesting. I think I already know the answer, but do you think the power system resilience should be tackled at the European or at the national level at the planning stage, and if so, how?
Well, for me, I will put it as both, okay, because as you know, we're obliged to have 15% of the interchange capacity to be interconnected, okay, so it's more economical to have a joint operation of the system. And then you see that those reports from NSOE regarding the system adequacy, and so we are sharing the generation.
Very good. Then we have a couple of questions roughly on the renewable share increase. So one says, with the renewable share increase, how will it solve the lack of production if we just increase the renewable share? When there's lack of wind or solar, what do we do? Or will this mitigate the blackout chance or improve resilience? if we need higher capacities due to these renewables. So can you comment, Rui?
Okay, I mean, of course, if we increase the capacity, it will help because means that at the end we have more energy, but will increase the risk. Okay, the question I see here is that we need more demand flexibility on the energy availability, meaning that if there is more wind, people will have lower prices, so we'll use those kind of energy to have more hot water or something like that. Okay. So until nowadays, people don't have a lot of correlation between the consumption and the availability of the resources in the future. You need this, okay? Of course, the storage will mitigate the imbalance. Okay, that's one of the points.
Very good. Thanks. One other question is regarding to one of the things you presented. So, why was the embedded generation massively disconnected due to frequency excursions? This was a past problem. So, what can you provide more about?
Well, in the past, this was due to bad parameterization of the inverters. Okay, typically in Germany and in Italy, they had to change the settings, and sometimes they had to buy they had to upgrade the inverters. The other thing that I see is that the lack of knowledge on the distribution grid, because they sometimes they are putting these limits on the grid with the assumption that if there is a system split on the distribution grid, they prefer to have a blackout on the distribution grid and not to create an idle. Okay, and of course there is the assumption that frequency is always stable, which is wrong. Okay, because they really change a lot.
Excellent. One other question was to one of the phenomena you presented on the cause of the oscillations between Italy and Denmark. If you can elaborate a little bit on what.
Yeah, this instability was caused by a generator in Italy. Okay, and the lack of damping, which is something that sometimes occurred. It happened at that time. It will show up. 2019 again, and even this year we had the same event. But what we see is that the system operating in Italy, Terna, is able to detect and react very fast and mitigate this kind of oscillations.
Okay, very good. Another question was on dynamic line rating calculation. If this is something that ENTSO-E has been looking on, there's some document on this.
Yes, I mean, there is technical brochures for SIGRE for sure. I know that ENTSO-E has worked this on REDIC, on the research, but I think these documents are internal to ENTSO-E. I'm not sure they are public, okay? But I could look, and if you provide the email, I can see. But I'm not sure it's a public document, but yeah.
Thank you. One last question for Rui, and then I'll pass to Florin. So the last question is it technically possible to make voltage or frequency constraints less strict in the future and be more tolerant in your operating parameters? If so, how this would affect infrastructures? How this would need to be changed?
Yeah, for me, the limits of the voltage and frequency are the same for years, okay? So the problem for me, it's not the limits, it's not to relax the limits, is that the generators must respect and keep connected inside those limits. As I mean, the frequency is going from 47.5 to 51.5. And what we see is that if the frequency goes beyond 200 millihertz, they are going out. So they are not complying with the current limits. So it's not a question of being more tolerant or not. At least it's my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Florin, question for you. So could you please give a practical example of how preventive actions from the TSO perspective could be used to enhance security or resilience?
Yes, so I mentioned already, I think, in the presentation, so typical, let's say, preventive actions are topological actions that would even isolate some islands, especially if in case of resilience, if you feel that there will be some wildfire and you cannot defend that well, that region, or floods or storms or something like that. So it's a sort of preventive islanding. Of course, this is not very easy and it's a bit risky for operators, but it's something that is possible. Always you could simply have more generation on. So basically, generation redispatch, generation rescheduling, and I think topological actions are very important and very useful for both.
For sure. Thank you, Florian. One other question regarding, you mentioned the Attest project and the tools that you are developing there. So the question is very practical. Would they be available online after? Do you want to share something on this?
Yes. So basically, we are working on them, the team here at LIST, and there will be made publicly available the code at the end of the project or even during the project. So in 6 months to 1 year, I expect that this will be available online and could be tested by other researchers.
Okay, very good. So now I think we are reaching the end of our session. So I want also to answer to a question that was made regarding the presentation, if they would be made available. So as long as the presenters don't object, I think this can be made available, and this could be put on the web page in the next day or so people can download them and see them in more detail after. So since we are already past 1 minute past the hour, I would like to thank a lot the presentations from my two colleagues, Rui and Florian. Thank you very much. I think it was a really interesting interesting session, and even more so because we are in this specific situation now where resilience is on the order of the day, where all of these commotions with the war in Ukraine and how this affects energy dependence makes this a subject that is ever more important. So thank you for taking your time to share your experience, and also thank you for all the attendees on this LISTalks, and look forward to seeing you in the next event. So thank you very much all, and I think we can close the session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks also to all attendees. I hope that they really had something to learn from both of us. Thanks. Have a nice day.
For sure. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.